Hey, do you want to learn more about overcoming overlapping IP addresses with Static NAT? Just sign up for our Advanced Junos Security course. For full details, just visit juniper.net/courses and search for the course. And if you're pursuing Juniper Certification, you'll need to know this for the JNC IPsec exam. Now let's get to your Learning Byte.
Hello, my name is Zach Gibbs, and I'm a content developer within education services inside of Juniper Networks. And today we will be discussing the overcoming overlapping IP addresses with Static NAT Learning Byte. Alright, so let's talk about overlapping IP addresses, and let's discuss when this happens. In our example here, we have a corporate office, a larger company which acquires a smaller company, and these two companies happen to be using the same internal IP address spaces of 10.10.0.0/16. And as I'm sure you are aware of, you can't have duplicate IP addresses and have hosts within those two sets of networks that have duplicate IP addresses be able to talk to each other. So with the Juniper SRX, we can use Static NAT to solve this problem. So here's our example that we will be using, and there's a few things I want to point out. First of all, we have Company A and Company B. And in this example, Company A just acquired Company B. And unfortunately, they seem to have the same internal IP addressing. And at this time, Company A is unable to reassign the IP addressing for Company B. So the crux of the matter is that Company A, or hosts in Company A, need to be able to communicate with hosts in Company B, even though they have the same IP address. And then one last thing I want to point out is, since this communication is going over the internet, we need to secure it. However, IPsec is already set up and working, so we won't be focusing on setting up IPsec in this Learning Byte. Okay, so a few things I do want to point out before we jump to the CLI is, first of all, with SRX1, I want to point out the GIGI001 interface and its associated IP address. Then I want to point out its GIGI002 interface and its associated IP address. And notice how GIGI001 points towards the internal LAN network, and GIGI002 points towards the WAN. Then on SRX2, GIGI001 and its associated IP address, which points towards the WAN, and GIGI002 with its associated internal IP address, which points towards that internal LAN. And then we have two hosts, host 1 and host 2. Notice that these hosts have the same IP address, which means by default they cannot communicate with each other. In our example, or the demo that I will be showing you, we're going to get those two hosts talking to each other. Then something else I want to point out, the acquired company virtual IP space and the corporate office virtual IP space. We'll be using those subnets as substitutes as we're doing our Static NAT, and we'll see how that works in the example. Alright, so without further ado, let's jump to the CLI. Alright, here's the CLI. Here we have SRX1, SRX2, host 1, and host 2. So with SRX1, let's get started. We'll jump into the configuration, and then we'll jump into the NAT configuration. Static NAT, that is. We'll call this OL-A for overlapping for Company A. Set from GIGI001, that internal interface. We'll edit rule 1. We'll set a destination address. We're going to be going to that virtual IP address space for the acquired company. We'll set the static NAT prefix, what we're going to be NATing to that virtual IP address of the corporate office space that we're using. And then go ahead and commit that. Oh, one other quick thing. I almost forgot. We need to configure a static route. This is going to be a static route going to the acquired company virtual IP space. We're going to push that through that IPsec tunnel. And we'll commit that configuration. And then we'll go to SRX2 and do the mirror of that. Internal interfaces GIGI002. Match on the source address of 10.1/16. Match on the destination address of the corporate office virtual IP address space. And then we'll NAT to the acquired company virtual IP space. Then we do have to set up a static route to the corporate office virtual IP space that points through the IPsec VPN. Commit that configuration, and then we'll test it out. So let's jump to host 1 and attempt to ping host 2 using that acquired company virtual IP address space. And that's not a good sign, but that's okay. I set this up incorrectly to show you something, because I see a lot of people do it this way, and see how we're getting it's unreachable from the next hop. That's not a good sign. So let's go ahead and actually, before we do that, we're going to leave that running. Look at the flow table. And if you notice here in the flow table, we're leaving from 10.1.0.1 going to 10.200.0.1. That's what we expect that. And then the reverse that we're expecting back is 10.100.0.1 going to 66.201.54.1. That's not what we wanted. And if you look at the diagram, we can see that's the IP address for SRX1's GIGI002 interface. So that means we're NATing that source address. So we look at the source NAT, we see we have a rule here, and we see in this rule that we're NATing from interface GIGI001 going to interface GIGI002. And if you recall, we're also doing that static NAT from GIGI001. And so that's where we're having the problems with this current scenario. And we can create a new rule called skip to overcome this current problem. So within this rule called skip, we're going to set the source address as host 1 for company A. And then we're going to turn source NAT off. And then we need to move rule skip in front of rule 1. And then commit the configuration. So let's jump to host 1 now. Start the ping again. And we're not getting a destination NAT unreachable, but it's still not working. We have some difference in the actual flow outputs, but let's look at this in more detail. We have going from 10.1.0.1 to 10.200.0.1. We expect that, and then the reverse flow is expecting 10.100.1 going to 10.1.0.1. That's incorrect. That's where our problem is. That should not be happening. And so to troubleshoot this further, we would need to jump into some flow trace options, and we don't have time for that in the Learning Byte, so I'm just going to cut to the chase and show you what's going on here. But before we do that, I'm going to deactivate that rule skip. We will not need that. And we're going to jump back to the static route. And what's happening here is we're looking at this from the wrong perspective. And the reason why I brought this up is because I've seen a lot of people, a lot of students, and when attempting to do overlapping IP addresses, attempting to solve that problem, they end up looking at it from the wrong perspective. We need to look at this from the perspective of SRX2. That is, from how that traffic is coming from SRX2. And so there's a few things we need to do. First of all, we're just going to delete everything under this rule set, and we're going to set from interface ST0 So it's coming from that IPsec VPN. And then we're going to set a match. We're just going to worry about the destination address here. There's no reason to worry about the source address. We have to think about how the traffic is coming from company B. So with the destination address, what is the destination address going to be? And it's going to be going to the 10.100/16, that virtual IP address space that we reserved for the corporate office. And then we have to think about what is it going to be translated to. It's going to be translated to that 10.1/16 address space. And we don't need to change that static route we set up. That's still going to work in our situation. So let's commit that. And then jump to SRX2 and do the same things. Again, you have to think about how the traffic is coming from SRX1. And it's going to be using the destination address of the acquired company virtual IP space. And then we're going to translate that to the 10.1/16 address space. And then commit the configuration. And I did forget something there. Let me set the from interface, the ST0 interface. Then we'll commit that configuration. There we go. Now let's look at host 1, see if that ping traffic is flowing. And it is. That's a good sign. We actually have traffic flowing. But we're not quite done yet. Let's check out a few things. We can see here that we have sessions flowing through that static NAT rule. That's awesome. That's what we expect. Look at the Ipsec statistics. We see we have traffic encrypted and decrypted. They're a little offset just with probably how when I entered that clear command, it cleared it kind of probably in the middle of packets being encrypted and decrypted. But things are working correctly. That's excellent. That's what we want to see. We now have communication between those two sites, between those hosts. And then one last thing, we can look at the actual flow session. We can see we're coming from 10.1.0.1 going to 10.200.0.1, and then 10.200.0.1 on the reverse traffic is communicating with 10.100.0.1. That's exactly what we want to see. And something else to point out here that I did forget to point out earlier that I did plan on it is if we look at the interfaces here. We see the incoming interfaces for the ingress. The start of the session is Gigi001. That's what we want. And then the return traffic is going to be on ST0.0. And if we looked at the sessions from before, that return traffic would have been on Gigi002, which is not what we're looking for. And so this is what we're looking for. Everything's flowing correctly. We've now solved the problem that we had with overlapping IP addresses by using Static NAT. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the Learning Byte. In this, we discussed the problem of overlapping IP addresses, and then we did a demonstration on how to resolve the overlapping IP address situation by using Static NAT. And so I hope this Learning Byte will be helpful to you in your day-to-day work, and as always, thanks for watching.
Visit the Juniper Education Services website to learn more about courses. View our full range of classroom, online, and e-learning courses. Learning paths, industry segment and technology-specific training paths. Juniper Network's certification program, the ultimate demonstration of your competence. And the training community, from forums to social media. Join the discussion.